Hello everybody and welcome to JTV. Well, unless you've been living in a cave for the last few weeks, you would have seen all these various stories about the rapper Kanye West, or Ye as he asked to be known, spouting anti-Semitism. It started off as a tweet which was a little bit ambiguous, and then has slowly morphed into explicit, classic anti-Semitic tropes. Now, before we discuss what's been happening here, and really what I wanted the focus of this discussion to be about was about whether anti-Semitism on the right in America is something to be especially concerned about. I just want to make a point about Kanye West himself, which is that it's pretty clear to me that he is someone that is not mentally well. Probably it may well be possible. I hear some people saying, he might not even hate Jews in his heart. He's just been wronged. That all may be the case. That may well be true. My issue is the second that you step up into the public forum and start saying things, we can't just dabble in all these excuses and whataboutery and say, oh well, maybe he doesn't. We can that can be dealt with in a private capacity, but the second that someone steps into the public realm, especially when they have a massive influence, they have to be called out, they have to be challenged, and sometimes have to be, I don't necessarily believe in the principles of cancel culture where people just can be eternally damned, but yes, sometimes people should, if they say things which are poisonous and which are racist and which are damaging to social cohesion, I see no reason why public organizations should decide to cut ties until the person changes their tunes or educates himself. And this happened a few years ago when a friend of mine or an acquaintance went on to a public the BBC radio a few years ago and was sort of spouting support of Jeremy Corbyn after he had been saying some anti-Semitic tropes, and I called him out, and people were saying, oh, come on, this is someone and you should. And I thought, that's all true, but when someone enters a public domain, they have to be called out, and I just want to make that point at the start before we go further in this interview, because it's so important that we make these distinctions. So we're joined by Ron Kampeas of the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. He's the Washington bureau chief for the JTA, and he has been covering the recent developments with Kanye West, and not just Kanye West himself, but also his meeting with Donald Trump. So, Ron, thank you so much for joining us here today on JTV. Really appreciate your time. You're currently in America, in DC, I believe. And do you want to just give us first an update on what has happened in the last week in terms of Kanye West's meeting with Trump and the fallout that's happened as a result?
So yeah, he met with Trump last Tuesday, not yesterday, but the Tuesday before that, at his residence in Mar-a-Lago, Florida, Trump's residence, and he brought along Nick Fuentes, a Holocaust denier, just an outspoken anti-Semite, with him. Trump claims that he didn't know who Fuentes was. I think he probably does know who Fuentes was, but it's definitely credible that in the moment, because Fuentes has admitted this, walking in, that he didn't know who he was. He was just a young man that Ye was bringing with him. There was, first of all, controversy attached to Trump meeting with West in the first place, with Ye in the first place, because he's become so pronouncedly anti-Semitic in the last month or so. But Trump and Ye and Kanye West have a long-standing friendship. So I think people were willing at least to take that into account, not necessarily in giving Trump a pass. But then he had no relationship with Fuentes. Fuentes is, his main jam is being hateful towards Jews. And for a couple of days, there were rumors that Fuentes was in Mar-a-Lago. Was he at the dinner? And at first they tried to say, there was an assistant to Trump that said, no, he wasn't at the dinner. He was just at Mar-a-Lago. No, it came out that he was at the dinner. That was all confirmed on Friday. And the condemnations immediately started rolling in from Jewish organizations here in the state, from Democrats, and from at first from Republicans who were known for having a bad relationship with Trump in the first place, who have criticized him for his excesses. People like the former governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, like Liz Cheney, the Wyoming congresswoman who led the investigation into the events of January 6th, the insurrection, and who Trump managed to back somebody to beat her in a primary, so she's not been reelected. But then, not more surprisingly, but I think more acutely, you had a condemnation Friday afternoon, right before Shabbat, from David Friedman, Trump's ambassador to Israel. And this is somebody who has never, except like very mild criticism after Charlottesville, and Trump's talking about, bad people on both sides. That was the extent of David Friedman's criticism of Trump throughout the whole Trump presidency. He loved Trump. Trump did everything that David Friedman hoped he would do. He moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, and David Friedman was saying on Twitter that you're better than this. You should not meet with these people, and that's there's like you were talking about whether, I think before we started, you were talking about what this signifies for the Republican Party. Well, for the right wing in the United States as we go forward. And I know that we're having like a lot of the same concerns that you had a few years ago when Jeremy Corbyn led the Labour Party. Is this now going to be the left in Britain? If you're Jewish and you don't want to vote right wing, what are you going to do? And now we're at that kind of inflection point with the Republicans and more politically conservative Jews in the United States, because at first, there was a real hesitancy to criticize Trump. Now there are people who are coming out and criticizing the meeting. Some of them are criticizing Fuentes and without mentioning Trump, and others are more openly criticizing Trump, as David Friedman did. You saw the split in Congress, where the Kevin McCarthy, who's going to be the next House Speaker, said he thought that Nick Fuentes there was no room for the likes of Nick Fuentes in the Republican Party, but he would not criticize Trump. And then you saw Mitch McConnell, who's the leader of Republicans in the Senate, saying that very, very sharply criticizing Trump and saying that this is a kind of meeting that's going to make sure that you don't get elected president in 2024, because Trump is so far the only declared candidate for 24, but he wants to be reelected. So the question is, who wins that battle? Is it the forces of McCarthy or the forces of McConnell? And I think a lot of people are looking now at the Republican Party and wondering whether it's if this is forgivable by Trump.
Ron, you have to help me understand this, because I've seen a lot of people, Trump himself, but other people as well, defending him by saying he didn't realize that Fuentes, the Holocaust-denying, anti-Semitic, white supremacist, fringe talk show host, didn't realize that Fuentes was coming. But hold on a second, isn't it bad enough that he was inviting Kanye West for a meal? Now, I think, look, if someone has a relationship with someone and they do things that are wrong, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to cut ties with that person. But to be meeting with someone who has, on many occasions over the last maybe 4 to 6 weeks now, spouted deeply blatant, explicit anti-Semitic tropes, to be meeting with them and at least not to put out a statement to say I reject his anti-Semitism by meeting him in a private capacity, to do none of that as the former president of the United States, to be lending credibility to someone like him. How are people sort of trying to just skim over that part of it? I mean, forget Fuentes for a second. He's meeting with Kanye West. How has he been given a pass for that?
I think it depends on who you're speaking to. I think, Benjamin Netanyahu just talked about this, and he talked about how meeting with Kanye was a mistake. And then so did David Friedman, and included both of them. But you're right. I mean, there's been a lot of criticism directed at the Fuentes element of the meeting, but not so much Kanye West. And that's like, it's not like there are defined factions within the Republican Party. There are more like a trajectory of beliefs that go along the line, and you're never sure where somebody is at any given moment. And so, the issue at first, at least with Kanye West, even before he met with Trump, when he just started coming out with these vile statements about Jews, was that there were like Jewish conservatives who were not defending him, but saying, "Oh, this is awful. He really needs to be talked to, especially since he's such an outspoken defender of Christianity and other conservative values, Kanye, that is." And I think the American right is always searching for authentic Black voices to represent its views. I think there's a kind of a nudge and a wink game. It knows when there are voices that are not credible, like the former football player who's running for Senate in Georgia, Herschel Walker. It knows when there are voices who are credible, and then the right wing knows that those voices are much more valuable. And there's a very well-spoken and strong and accomplished senator from South Carolina, Tim Scott, who's a Republican and who's Black, and so he's beloved. He's actually probably considering a run in 2024 for all those reasons. And here comes Kanye West, and how much more authentic can you get? The guy who redefined rap in the late 2000s, the guy who or even earlier, the guy who revolutionized music, who is an accomplished designer, and who is just a super celebrity. And he comes along and he's talking about Christianity, and he's talking about praise for Donald Trump, and then he says these things that are anti-Semitic, and they're saying, well, he really shouldn't say things. Maybe we can reach them somehow, but he's still valuable. And I think that has a lot to do with it.
I have no doubt, and I get that they see him as a real unique treasure because he's such an important cultural influence and has been supporting conservative values, and that's totally fair enough. But I'm just going to read to you some of the things that he said in an interview a few weeks ago. He said, quote, "I want Jewish children to look at their daddy and say, 'Why is Ye mad at us?' I can say anti-Semitic things and Adidas can't drop me. The Jewish people have their hands on every single business that controls the world. I'm me tooing the Jewish culture and saying, you're going to come out and say, what have you done?'" I mean, I can go on, but I get all of that he's useful, but there has to be a line that everyone has, within the Overton window of political debate where you say this no longer becomes acceptable. So again, I'm struggling to see where the moral difference is in terms of what is being said between Kanye West and Nick Fuentes.
Yeah, I don't think there isn't really a moral difference. I guess like the single issue is that I don't think Kanye has just denied the Holocaust yet. I think Dave Chappelle in his SNL thing talked about Kyrie Irving, the basketball player, not knowing what the Holocaust was, so sort of mocking that kind of thing. But yeah, that's basically that's a single difference between Kanye and Fuentes, and there is no moral difference. I mean, I think that the Overton window is moving rightward for Republicans, and it has to do with Trump being successful despite all the, having been elected president and having almost been reelected president, despite every scandal and every attachment to a bigotry that attended to him. Remember, before the 2016 elections, he said something god awful about how he molested women, and whether or not he did or not, and there's evidence that he did, he was actually bragging about it. And he's also made a plainly racist statement about a judge who was adjudicating his Trump University case, who happened to be of Mexican American descent, and he was elected anyway. And so that is the kind of sequence that moves the Overton window to the right, because he's a success and he does it anyway. And I think that's like, people are watching Kanye West. He's not being canceled. He joked about not being canceled. He lost the Adidas contract, but he's not being canceled yet. And they're wondering whether he can survive this. And if he can survive this, that's not good news for Jewish Americans, I think, because for somebody to be so plainly anti-Semitic, you haven't seen anything like this in America in maybe 90 years since Charles Lindbergh remained a hero despite his plainly anti-Semitic views, Henry Ford remained a hero until his death. He was a virulent anti-Semite. Father Coughlin had his show on the radio, and World War II, to an extent, turned that around. But now we're seeing that. We could be seeing that again if Kanye West is allowed to sort of go on unapologetically about the Jews and to still have a successful career. That is going to give a lot of people, it's going to inspire a lot of people. I think it's going to give a lot of anti-Semites green lights. And that's what they want from this.
Yeah. I guess what's so disturbing to me is the way in which people are justifying or excusing what he's doing. I hear some people saying he's clearly been wronged by one or two people who are Jewish. And I'm like, well, so what? So I don't even know if he has been wronged, but let's say he has been wronged. What does their Jewishness have to do with anything? And number two, there's no excuse for racism. Why should I be responsible as a Jew living in London for someone who happened to be Jewish wronging him? I again don't know what happened, and who knows what the details are. But it's like you can excuse any racist in history, any oppressor in history. And again, I do believe in conversation and education. And I'd be happy in a private setting. To engage with Kanye West and try to show him the logical flaws and why he's engaging in false tropes about Jews and all that. So I don't believe in like people being eternally damned. But if you are a public figure and you're using a public platform, there is no excuse to justify bigotry and generalizing about groups. And it's just what I just find it so surprising. Exactly as you said, it feels pretty unprecedented in modern times to see such a big cultural figure articulating such explicit anti-Semitism, and yet so many people not necessarily agreeing with it, but saying, well, he's been wronged, or maybe he's just not thinking it through, or he's unwell, or just we have to put it to one side because he's such a useful figure for the conservative cause. And by the way, as a Jew, putting aside left and right stuff, I certainly do feel grateful for some of the causes to support the Jewish people that the Republican Party, even under Donald Trump, did, and the peace deals with Israel and Arab nations, fantastic. But we have to be able to compartmentalize. That shouldn't tie our hands to say, therefore, we can never ever criticize anything Trump does. And I also think in the case of Trump, I don't think he's anti-Semitic. I think he just cares about himself and his own brand primarily. And so that it was just a question of his political interest meeting with Kanye West. But again, that doesn't provide fodder for an excuse to excuse this kind of behavior. So to what extent have you been seeing as a political commentator and analyst, to what extent are you seeing mass scale justifying or excusing of Kanye West? I mean, I know Ben Shapiro has waded into this debate recently as a very big Jewish observant political commentator, and he started off by saying, Kanye West has been very good in terms of supporting socially conservative values, but this is wrong. And then I think it's progressively just been getting more and more like this guy is a real menace. But to what extent is this would you say the mainstream Republican Party and Republicans are like calling this out entirely, or like kind of having a surprising amount of excusing and whataboutery?
I think that regarding Kanye West, I think there's like you said, I think Ben Shapiro describes the trajectory that's happening there. Like you said, when he first came out, it was like, well, this is unfortunate, and he has he has good qualities about him. And now, his comment on Shapiro's comment on Trump's meeting, I forget exactly how it went, but it was a very sharply worded tweet about the way, I think something like the way you don't meet with anti-Semites is you don't meet with anti-Semites. Yeah. And so I think that there's a tendency, at least on the Jewish right, to write Kanye West off. I don't know to what degree that's going to happen generally, especially if he's seen as somebody who can rally votes in 2024. I don't know if the people who are advising him have commonalities. Like he's taking advice from Milo Yiannopoulos, who most recently worked for Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a very far right wing congresswoman from Georgia, who now is very influential in the party now that it's won the U.S. House of Representatives back from the Democrats, and she's considered. So that's like, that's not exactly a very long line that I just drew from Marjorie Taylor Greene. Kevin McCarthy is taking advice from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's taking advice from Milo Yiannopoulos, who is the chief political consultant to the most preeminent anti-Semite in the United States. So we're going to have to see how within the general Republican Party the whole Kanye West thing plays out. There's been like I said, I think that, like, you're right. I think a lot of the excuses for West came out as soon as he started making his statements. I think I've heard there's been a lot of silence more recently, and we'll have to see except like I think from Jewish Republicans who are speaking out. But I think we're going to have to see where it goes from there.
What is the future of the Republican movement? Can you see this going either way? Can you see this as being like they're going to move on from the kind of the Trumpian era, and the kind of it's almost like Trump's approach has been like is connected to this to some extent, in that his whole approach has been like never apologize, no excuses, and it's like almost like they're in a state of war. To win for their cause, and so what that does is that leads to no level of self-reflection or ability to say, actually, no, this is wrong, got to call this out. And I feel like that's filtered into a lot of what we're seeing here, where they're just unable to actually just say this is wrong, end of. To what extent do you think that? I mean, what do you see happening? What would you predict is going to happen in terms of the Republican movement? Are they going to kind of shift into their more kind of traditional centre-right kind of approach to things as they had before Trump came along? Or do you think the Trump movement will continue in some other form, but they'll manage to carve out this poison? Or could you see this actually, the Milo Yiannopoulos and all that kind of stuff actually becoming a seriously growing faction in the Republican movement, to the extent they may even have the leadership?
I don't know if they're going to become a serious faction in the Republican movement. I think that extreme right, I think they had a taste of, the Republican Party overall had a taste of what could happen when Lauren Boebert, who's the Marjorie Taylor Greene of the West in Colorado, came within a few hundred votes of losing her seat just now to a Jewish Democrat in a very, very Republican part of Colorado. So there's a kind of exhaustion with these antics, and I think they know that. But I do think, on the other hand, the Republican Party, Trump has permanently changed the Republican Party. I think part of it is much more insular. You're seeing a greater insularity, you're seeing much greater nationalism, and you're seeing it in candidates who have won, like J.D. Vance of Ohio. These are people who are going to be leaders of the party. And I think that people who were previously kind of the moderate Republicans you describe have gravitated to the right, people like Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, because they identify it with a success in terms of, like what you say, the no apologies. I was just at the Republican Jewish Coalition conference in Las Vegas, and one of the big stars there was Ron DeSantis, because the governor of Florida, because on an otherwise very bad day for Republicans, on November the 8th, which was the election day, Florida just like was the mirror image of the rest of the United States. Republicans swept every office. They did very, very well. And so if you look at DeSantis, he's Trump with a lot of the baggage. There are like some minor scandals afflicting him, but there are no great financial scandals. He doesn't openly identify with racists as Trump has. But then you have this kind of thing, and I think, particularly for Jews, it would be worrisome, where a few times neo-Nazis And the neo-Nazis supported his election. Now, that's not his fault that they supported his election in 2018 when he was first elected, but they did. And so now he's become their kind of hero because of his, he talks about Florida as being the place woke goes to die. He's anti-woke. He's anti-teaching any kind of thing that has to do with racial differences. He's instituted laws that repress certain expressions of LGBTQ. And so with the Jews particularly, you have this kind of thing where twice I think it's happened that neo-Nazis have demonstrated, have appeared outside his events, and he's been asked, do you condemn these neo-Nazis? And instead of just like telling the 600,000 Jews in Florida, of course, this is a terrible phenomenon, I absolutely condemn this, he says things like, well, they're jackasses, but why are you asking me that gotcha question? And so it becomes like the whole conventional message that you might have once had before, where marginal actors like neo-Nazis should just be shamed, marginalized, put to the side, and not given any quarter, gets subsumed by the culture wars, where Ron DeSantis wants to attack, rather than just simply putting out a statement saying, of course, I condemn these people, he turns it into an opportunity to attack the media. And of course, any condemnation, and it's, calling a group of Nazis jackasses is not exactly the strongest condemnation there is, but even that gets subsumed to the story of Ron DeSantis. Aha, he stuck it to the media one more time, when really what the Jewish community is thirsty for is just an assurance that these people are completely out of bounds. Not just that you're their jackasses, but that you condemn them, you don't want their support, you completely reject their support. The Hebrew expression is chad v'chalak, an outright statement that you reject them. And I think in terms of what you were talking about, the no forgiveness attitude, the being at war attitude that Trump brought to the Republican Party is staying. And when you have that attitude, there's very little room for correction when there are expressions of bigotry and anti-Semitism and racism.
That actually would be my chief criticism of the whole Trump thing, that the art of conversation and the art of critical thinking and like self-reflection has been lost. And I'm seeing, and it's I say this with no, with pain. I rise in just conspiratorial thinking about the world and about government, and just sometimes an inability to just face basic truths. I guess my last question would just be about the future of America generally. There's a great deal of polarization on both sides, and not just for the future of America, but for Jewish people as well. Kanye West, a huge figure. If he isn't sidelined by the people that are giving him platforms, giving him credibility, is it possible? Is it foreseeable that Jewish people could start to seriously question their future in America, in the Republican Party, and just more broadly, is there is this something that's going to continue to grow and fester?
Right now, I don't think Jews, going from the micro to the macro, I don't think Jews are, the Republican Jews aren't leaving the party. It looks like they're maintaining the kind of, you saw in the midterms, they're maintaining the kind of support, 25 to 30% that they've traditionally had for the Republican Party. So I don't think that's changing at least in the near term. Long term, though, I think, I think that Jewish Americans are going to start thinking about alternatives if they're living in a country where somebody like Dave Chappelle, with the Dave Chappelle case, where he essentially defended some of Kanye West's ideas while mocking some of them at the same time, he was getting laughter for those jokes about Jews being in control in Hollywood on a prime time, not a prime time, but on one of the most popular broadcasts as opposed to cable TV shows. And that unsettled a lot of Jews and made them wonder where this was going. I think there's time for a course correction. I think that the Republican Party underestimated the degree to which these issues occupy the American voter's mind, both in terms of turning out Democratic voters, getting them to vote, but also in terms of weight of swaying independence one way or another. And you saw that on November the 8th. They did much more poorly than expected. They were dismissing issues like abortion and but also democracy, the threat to democracy. Obviously, the threat to democracy isn't exactly anti-Semitism, but they're kind of adjacent in this context. And the constant question, because conspiracy theories ultimately lead to Jews, and the whole sort of issue that the lies about the Trump peddles about the 2020 elections, those things have proven damaging. And I think there's going to be a kind of course correction, a hope that they, an effort within the party to steer them away from that. I don't know to what degree they're able to. One of the ironies of the Republicans doing so poorly in the House, in that they, instead of sweeping the House elections, they're barely elected, is that Kevin McCarthy is much more reliant on the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the Republican caucus. So, do they look at Marjorie Taylor Greene and say, we don't want her going out and damaging us on the base? Or do they look at Lauren Boebert and say, my God, she nearly lost because she is so extreme. She nearly lost in a Republican district, and say, let's distance ourselves from these people. And I don't know, that's going to be the thing we're going to have to watch over the next 2 years.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is an interesting and disturbing moment, I think, in American history, and we're going to have to see how things develop. I think Jewish people should remain proud of who we are, should not be intimidated, and communicate our message and concerns clearly. And hopefully, politicians, activists, citizens will be will understand and resonate and support what our concerns are. And if they don't, well, we'll have to reevaluate. So I guess this is something we have to keep our eye on, as I know you are doing on a daily basis. So yeah, Ron, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and for giving us your insights as someone that's looking very closely at the political developments in America. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on JTV.
Thank you.